Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Partaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gratitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitamritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambattvamanusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim. Namostu te Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Fullaravinda Yatapatra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharata Taila Purna Prajvalito Jnanamaya Pradipaha Prapanna Parijata Totra Vitraikapanai Jnana Mudraya Krishnaya Gitamrita Duhe Namaha. Sarvopanishado Gavo Dogda Gopalanandanaha Partho Vatsa Sudhir Bhokta Dugdam Gitamritam Mahata Vasudeva Sudam Devam Kamsachanura Mardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Thank you for joining us for one more Bhagavad Gita class. We're in chapter 18, if you're not familiar. And up to the 48th verse, Lord Krishna talked about Karma Yoga, which is basically offering our own swadharma, or our natural duty, as a worship to God. The result is that everyone gets the same inner purification, no matter what their occupation is, and we call that purification Chitta Shuddhi, which Krishna simply called perfection in verse 46. Irrespective of one's varna, which is your role you play in society, the four that we have from India are Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. So the people who are the ones who kind of lead spirituality and religion in a country would be the Brahmanas. Then those who are civil servants and firefighters, police, and politicians all fit into the category of Kshatriya. And Vaishya are merchants, business people. And Shudra are the all-important group of people who supports all of the other efforts. And once we get a requisite amount of that Chitta Shuddhi, that purification, Karma Yoga is no longer mandatory, but we know what Amma thinks. She wants us to set an example for others, even if we have memorized all the scriptures. Anyhow, at that time, our mind will no longer crave activity, but it will be full of compassion. So even those who have purified themselves will engage in activity. Either way, they have no likes or dislikes, so to them, whether they do actions or not doesn't really matter. Tonight's topic is about the person who has fully purified themselves, as well as the two methods for what takes place afterwards. So what happens traditionally from the ancient times was that once you get to that level of perfection, inner perfection, you would usually do the traditional version of sannyasa with the ritual, and you conduct your own, funeral, etc. Technically, that is called vividisha sannyasa. You renounce your family, your wealth, your possessions, status, all worldly things. And as a result, you are absolved of all your typical duties that a householder would have had. A sannyasi's only dharma is sadhana, especially learning Vedanta, or we could say the Guru's teachings, Guru Upadesha, and contemplating on those teachings. The other method is for those who cannot take sannyasa for some reason. They can remain with their family, but they must live like a sannyasi. That means even though you're in your own house, you have to act as though it was somebody else's house, and you're just a guest. You can't decide anything. Yet, since they have not renounced formally, they still have some duties to society and their family, but they don't have to do it in a big way. They don't have to spend a lot of money, just the bare minimum. They still have to do it. When done properly, this kind of lifestyle can be called sannyasa of sorts, and we can also call it vanaprastha. So the idea is that the involvement in worldly affairs should be reduced, and the responsibilities are gradually handed over to the next generation. And the ending verse of last week was verse 49. One whose intellect is unattached everywhere, who has subdued their self, free from desires, by renunciation they attain to the supreme perfection, consisting of freedom from action. Freedom from action. Wow. Hearing this, we might become interested in this line of thought. No worldly affairs, handing over everything to others and attain freedom from action. This is exactly what every lazy person wants to hear. So when we're feeling lazy, I'm going to go for that one. And then it's like finally a philosophical justification for my indolence. There's a joke that Amma has told once or twice before. This man goes to the hospital and he's really low on energy. And he has all these tests done and, he's eagerly waiting for the doctor to come back into the room and tell him what's wrong with him. And the doctor comes back and he says, okay, Mr. Jones, I know what it is. You're just lazy. And so Mr. Jones, he didn't bat an eyelash. He says, okay, can you just tell me the medical term for that? Because I have to tell it to my wife. Then I have an excuse for being lazy. The problem is that freedom from action doesn't apply to the body. It only belongs to the Atman. On the physical plane, actionlessness is impossible. There's thoughts, we have involuntary actions, we have to breathe, and when we sleep, we're sleeping, and that's actually an action of sorts. And we have dreams while we're sleeping, so it's impossible. If we truly want to be actionless, we have to become established in the Atman, or true nature. Because the only thing that is actionless is the Atma. Real actionlessness is simply abiding in one's own self. But that's probably the most hard thing to do. We can connect the content of this verse with chapter 3, verses 27 and 28, where Lord Krishna says, actions are in every case performed by the gunas of nature. The sattva, rajas, and tamas, these gunas are what make up the whole universe. One whose mind is deluded by the sense of I feels, I am the doer. But one who knows the truth remains unattached, knowing that it is just the gunas that acting upon the gunas. Vedanta says that we need not become actionless. We are already actionless. But we have wrongly identified with the anatma, which is the body, mind, and intellect for us. And that's what makes us look as though we are active. You remember the analogies with your car being parked and a train or another car moves next to you. You feel like you're moving. That's only because it's close, but you're not actually moving. Your car is still parked. So it's the same kind of theory. If we drop the identification, then we are actionless. It's like dropping the sleeping me and awakening the waking me. The sleeping me can fly, talk with Amma and Malayalam perfectly, and even get attacked by a wild animal. But how do we drop all those experiences upon waking? Is there some special technique? No. We don't need to do anything because we realized that it was all just a dream. We were lying in our bed the whole time. So all that, the dream action was not real. And for us, the challenge is to realize this world just like that. I remember as an 8-year-old or 9-year-old boy, I got the sleeping state and the real state confused once. I had a dream about playing with some boy, and we were having so much fun. And I asked him what his name was, and he told me what his first and last name was, but I don't remember. That was too long ago. And then I woke up, and I was so sad that my new friend, was gone. And then I remembered his name. Now you'll think I'm crazy, but I went down to the kitchen and I found the phone book, and I was looking up all the people who had his last name. And I'll never forget this. I called each one of them. You know, is Bobby Jones at your house? Do you have any kids? You know, and then some people got angry and they, hung up the phone or shouted at me. But most people were very kind and kind of helped me. Like, why don't you try another person's house? I'm sure you'll be able to find your friend. So I don't know how long it took me to realize that it's not going to happen. But as a young kid, I guess we were innocent enough to actually believe that kind of thing. And then in chapter 5, verses 8 and 9, Krishna said, "One who is union with the divine and who knows the truth will maintain, I don't act at all." And then he gives a long list of all the things the person could be doing, like seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, walking, etc. And he says, while they're doing all these things, they hold that the senses simply engage with the objects of sense. You're just watching it happen. You're not actually doing any of that. So this is what we're going to dive into tonight, starting from verse 50. And we'll chant that together. Siddhim prapto yata brahma tatapnoti nibodhame samase naiva kaunteya nishtanyānasya ya para. I didn't change anything except for adding a couple of parentheses. And so it just reads, "O son of Kunti, know from me and breathe how such a person of perfection attains to Brahman, that supreme consummation of knowledge." And the actionlessness I put in brackets because it wasn't actually in the text. But I know why our translator put it there, because it comes in the commentary. That's usually the only why he changes anything. Shankaracharya's commentary, I'm just going to clarify going to use his commentary to clarify a couple of points. How such a person of perfection, that part. He says, consisting in their body and sense organs becoming qualified for the devotion of the path of knowledge. So later on we're going to hear this word perfection or perfect in a different meaning. So in this case it means this person is prepared for the path of knowledge, which is a big thing because most people think they are, but they aren't. And he says that purification has come through the grace of the Lord whom they worshipped by performing their natural duty. So their swabhava, their swadharma was the way in which they became qualified for the path of knowledge. So that's very important point, because some people will say, oh, karma yoga is for, beginners or something like that. But they don't understand that they themselves haven't even become qualified to follow jnana yoga. But we don't have to say that, just as long as you yourself don't get confused about that point. And then they attain to Brahman. And just to make it clear, he's referring to the Supreme Self, the Paramatman, namely the path of Jnana Nishta. Jnana Nishta means you are established in knowledge. It's not, later on in today's class, we'll give a little more explanation about some seemingly graded knowledge. Jnaneshwara has so many good things tonight, I had to reduce them because there was so much, but not enough time. When the sun rises, light envelops darkness from all sides. When camphor comes into contact with a lamp, it too becomes a lamp. When a granule of salt is dropped in water, it becomes water. So too, if they hear the instruction of the Guru through good fortune, their mind sheds the notion of duality and rests in the nature of self. Then can anyone say that any action must be performed by them? But in the case of another seeker, they do not become one with Brahman immediately after hearing the words of the Guru. Because in the Upanishads, when you read them, you'll see somebody's giving a teaching in an Upanishad, and the person in the course of a few verses, he or she becomes realized. So he's saying, not the guy who got realization in 5 minutes. It's the rest of us. So in the case of another seeker, they do not become one with Brahman immediately after hearing the words of the Guru. It may be that they have kindled the fire in the form of performance of their dharma, swadharma, by feeding it with the firewood in the form of fruit-motivated and prohibited actions, then burn down the rajas and tamas qualities. So he's saying that, instead of doing the wrong actions, they are just offering that into the fire of their swadharma. Let's say you wanted to be a opera singer, and you ended up being a auto mechanic. All those ideas about becoming, maybe you didn't have a good enough voice or something. All those, darn feelings, you just offer those into your swadharma. And that purifies us the most. Then they may have brought under their control the craving for sons, wealth, and heaven. This is 750 years ago, don't forget. By subjugating them, subjugating those desires, in other words. In the holy waters of sense restraint, they may have cleansed their wayward senses, defiled by the enjoyment of sense objects. That's so great for today's year. It's like people think sense objects are the greatest, and he's saying that they just defile your sense organs. They may have followed all the paths of spiritual disciplines to attain the vision of the pure self. And lastly, after they met the Guru may have instructed them in self-knowledge, withholding nothing from them. But can a patient recover from their illness immediately after taking medicine and resume their former state? Does it become noon immediately after sunrise? Can one reap a harvest immediately after sowing a seed in a fertile and well-watered field? All of these require time. Even if there is a straight road and a good companion, it requires time to reach the destination. This is so good for all of us who are kind of anxious to go faster on the path. In this way, after attaining detachment, they meet the Guru and discernment rises in their mind. Then they become convinced through discriminating knowledge that Brahman alone is real and that the world is an illusion. Don't say that and say, so I don't have to do any karma yoga, I don't have to help anybody. That's the wrong interpretation. Amma would really not be happy. Then all activity to secure liberation comes to an end in Brahman, which is all-pervading and supreme. But this union with Supreme Brahman is attained only gradually. If the seeker wishes to attain fitness to enjoy the grandeur of self-knowledge, I shall describe the stages by which they attain it. Interested? Nah, let's just go watch TV. Okay. Okay, Chidbhavananda Swami's commentary. Siddhi, or perfection, is the state that everything in nature is incessantly struggling for. The sentient and the insentient are all shaping themselves only for perfection. Carbon that remains buried under the earth for ages turns into a precious diamond, a possibility not ordinarily considered. Time and environment are the factors contributing to this great miracle. However, of all the beings attempting for perfection, that of human beings enjoys a special merit. The perfection of other beings is confined to the material plane. Therefore, it can also be nullified. A diamond, for example, may be reduced to carbon again. Honey, nectar, even ambrosia will ultimately return to earth. But the perfection that is open to human beings leads us to immortality, changelessness, and enlightenment. It's a good way of explaining it. They have, that's why I love it, all three of them have different perspectives, so we get a really rounded out vision of it. But this is still just an introduction of the new topic, which is Jnana Yoga. Not the first time of Jnana Yoga, but he's changing in this chapter. He's going to use the word siddhi multiple times, and almost every time we should understand that it means chitta shuddhi, the qualification to practice Jnana Yoga. And that chitta shuddhi comes from Karma Yoga, so nobody should ever belittle Karma Yoga. Without that, you cannot enter the hall of God realization. And then this part attains to Brahman. It doesn't mean right this second, it means later. Once we attain Brahman, we realize our actionlessness, but until then, it's constant effort. So, if you were looking for the easy way, you might be disappointed. But don't go away. You'll figure it out. And what is meant by supreme consummation of knowledge? What is the deal? Is like, are there higher and lower levels of knowledge? In some sense. But after reading a few books and watching a few YouTube videos, some people feel that they have grasped Jnana Yoga very firmly, and they'd love to tell you about it for a long time. Certainly, the ideas and proclamations of Vedanta are great, but in the beginning, our understanding is not full. It is mixed with a lot of fuzziness. We need to clarify all of our questions until each point makes sense to us. And that may take its own sweet time, but it's better than jumping to the wrong conclusion about yourself. Then even if we have a confusion-free version of the Vedantic teachings, we may still have a lot of vasanas and habits to deal with. Anger, anxiety, lethargy, arrogance, and so on. So these deep habits are not so easy to get rid of. So people who have powerful intellects are more likely to grasp the concepts, but they may have 10 times more bad habits than the other guy. When I came back from India in 2020, I was trying to clean up the house, and I noticed that all the clocks were dead because they just sat there with no battery change or anything like that. And then I took them all down, and then I thought, no, let me put one back up on the wall and see how long it takes me to not look at it. Because every time I walk through that room, I see that clock, and I know it's not working. But this habit is so ingrained in me that when I come around that corner, I always look at that time. and it was still there a couple months ago, but It's just very difficult to get rid of these habits. So this is the problem with our knowledge as well, our understanding. It's not because we don't believe in the teaching or doubt that the teaching is wrong. It is purely due to habit. It is called viparita bhavana, which is habitual wrong thinking. That's why Amma is emphasizing the importance of alertness and awareness so much these days, because it's okay to be ignorant, but to have that bad habit of going back to the wrong knowledge, then that's more worrisome. So just for sake of understanding, we can say that the first step is that we're ignorant. That's okay. Number 2 is partial knowledge mixed with questions and habitual wrong thinking. The next version is version 3.0, and the questions are cleared, but the wrong thinking still remains. 4.0 is finally pure knowledge, and then 5 would be merge in Amma. So number 1 is Shravanam. You remember that 3 stages, learning and towards liberation. It's Shravanam, listening to the Guru's teachings. Mananam, contemplating on those. And Nididhyasanam is removing all of our wrong thinking. So number 1 in this list was Shravanam, number 2 is Mananam, and number 3 is Nididhyasana. In this first stage, it is called Jnanam, or just simply knowledge. Later, it is called Jnana Nishta, which means fixity in knowledge or establishment in knowledge. And that is what Krishna proposes to speak about now. But he's not going to cover the Shravanam and Mananam. He's already done that before. So we're going to jump to 3, which is Nididhyasana. Verse 51. I should warn you that the pronunciation of this verse is a little difficult. Oh, I didn't do the reading through for the last verse, do my penance. Let's go back to 50 so we can chant it one together. I always forget that, my bad. Siddhim prapto yata brahma tato tatan taptapnoti nibodame samase naiva kaunteya nishtanyānasya ya para. Now I'm going to go slower because 51 is a little harder to pronounce. Buddhya vishuddhaya. No, wait a second. Buddhya vishuddhaya yukto dhritatmanam niyamyacha shabdadin vishayamstyaktva ragadveshau vyudasya cha. Now slowly together. Buddhya vishuddhaya yukto dhrityatmanam niyamya cha shabdadin vishayam styaktva ragadveshau vyudasya cha. I changed it a few places. Endowed with a pure intellect, subduing the self, in parentheses, body and the senses, with fortitude, and then Instead of discarding, I used abandoning sound and other sense objects. Abandoning attraction and aversion. Okay, you should know that this is one of 3 verses that are supposed to go together, but it becomes very long and it's hard to keep track. So we're breaking it down to 3 verses. Endowed with a pure intellect, subduing the self with fortitude, abandoning sound and other sense objects, abandoning attraction and aversion. All right, let's try to understand this before we go to the next verse. Shankaracharya's commentary came in very helpfully here. Endued with a pure intellect means possessed of the conviction free from Maya. So, typically when we have a conviction, it gets shaken by what happens around us. Does that person, can I really trust that person or not? You know, but here he is completely free from all Maya and confusion, so it's a 100% conviction. Subduing the self means subduing the body and senses. That's come up in the Gita many times. Relinquishing sense objects such as sound, etc., means abandoning all superfluous happiness. Doesn't mean you can't listen to Amma's bhajans, but there may be other things that we're wasting our energy on. And all objects except those that are necessary to sustain the body. So this is a very strict interpretation of it. But you get the idea. So we should relinquish sense objects as much as we can without going crazy. And ultimately, like he said here, very strictly. Abandoning attachment and hatred, I think this is actually, no, it's aversion. It's just raga dvesha. It means likes and dislikes. It's a simple way of looking at it. Even for those objects that are needed for body maintenance. So let's say you have a towel, you have, your comb or something to comb your hair. We shouldn't have attachment to those things either. So that's a little difficult because you might only have one comb. But we have to believe that we'll always be taken care of. Amma says that nobody has died on the path of spirituality when they were practicing sadhana properly and genuinely. Now, Jnaneshwar's commentary. They follow the path indicated by the Guru, and reaching the bank of holy waters in the form of discernment, they wash off all the impurity of their intellect. I love this. It's so poetic and you don't forget it. Their intellect, after being purified, becomes attracted to the self. So if you don't know why you're not attached to the formless God, means we have to purify our intellect more and more. In the life of acquiring the desirable knowledge, they have eliminated the 5 sense objects that they prized so long, in the same way as the sunset destroys a mirage. So that means all these things that we're running after are just a mirage. And instead of the sun, we have knowledge that makes it clear. Just as one who has unknowingly eaten impure food is forced to vomit it, so too they have banished sensuous desires from the senses. From the senses, not just from your mind, but this, like your hands and eyes and ears, they're not going to do those. They're not going to cooperate with those things anymore. Then, after withdrawing the senses from the sense objects, they bring them to the bank of the Ganga in the form of the mind and wash them clean through tapas, austerity. I think 10 people just dropped off the call. Then, after purifying the senses with sattvic fortitude, they keep themselves engaged in the practice of yoga. When they are required to experience the fruits of their past deeds, good or bad, they don't grieve over their sufferings or long for enjoyments. Thus, they don't feel joy or grief when good or bad things happen, and they resort to a solitary place. Bhagavad Swami says, a thing is said to be pure when it is unaffected by extraneous objects. Good definition. Distilled water is pure because it contains nothing else. One should delve into the nature of a pure understanding. Nothing else should be in there, just pure understanding. And then he explains why. Seen through a blue glass, a yellow object appears green. Here, the peculiarity of the instrument of sight imposes itself on the object seen. However, when you see through a pure, colorless glass, yellow remains yellow. The intellect is the jivatma, or the individual soul's instrument of seeing this world. Defects in the intellect distort the seer's vision. Thus, the foremost factor in self-purification is purifying the intellect. A serene and equipoised intellect fixed on pure consciousness is here designated as pure understanding. Restraining the self results in transcending body consciousness. Thoughts of the body rarely cross the mind of a perfect sadhak. Well, we know that. It's so hard to get Amma to do anything for herself. I've probably told you before, but I'll tell you again. We were in some Hyatt hotel. It was just the best hotel in town. Very luxurious. And of course, the hotel gave Amma like the biggest room. And then she took the smallest corner of it and gave the rest to the staff because they didn't have anywhere to go. But it just so happened Amma's area had this big jet tub, and then Amma had just done long darshan, and you can tell that, it takes a toll on the body. And then I happened to be there with her, and I said, Amma, there's a jet, bathtub here. I can just turn on the hot water. And she was, no. I said, why not? It's free. Yeah. And then she says, I can't waste water like that. It's hopeless, I'm telling you. The body clings to them like a shadow. This is the sadhak, because they don't care about the body, so it's all the body can do is just cling on to them like a shadow. Firmness in the attainment of this perfection leads one to the state of Brahman. The external indication of this firmness is the absence of bodily cravings, such as food and clothing. Even toward what comes to them without asking, they have no attraction or aversion. Simplicity and self-mastery are narrated through their life. You are the narrator for everybody. So this verse, like I said, it's the first of three that come together. And what brings them together is the topic, which is nididhyasanam, which is a very deep kind of meditation where we remove all the wrong notions that are making us struggle on the path of spirituality, and it rectifies all of our wrong understandings about world and everything. And the fruit of that is what? Is that we get established in knowledge. This too is not a new topic. It came in chapter 6. It's just a reminder. But what do we mean by the foremost requisite for knowledge? Well, it's clarity of thinking. The intellect illuminates everything properly so we can think clearly. This is especially important when we consider goals and priorities in life. Should I sacrifice money for contentment or the other way around? What is the ultimate goal anyhow? We cannot always ask Amma everything. Our intellect should have enough clarity to choose the right thing. The intellect should tell us clearly what is temporary and what is everlasting, and turn us in the right direction. We cannot call it hatred when you avoid food that gives you an upset stomach. It's just proper judgment. Love is our true nature, but the nature of the world is that not everybody returns the love we show to them. So we have to remember both and not lean on others for affection. Even better is to allow others to lean on us with no expectations from our side, if we have enough inner strength to do so. So these are the kind of things that the intellect, after being purified, it should tell us all these things. And we're not suppressing things, we're just making the right choices. And in that metaphor of the chariot and the charioteer and the person sitting there with the 5 horses in front of the Kali temple, if you didn't already know, the intellect is the charioteer, while the mind is the reins of the chariot. So the mind becomes next in the order of importance. That's why in this verse it says, subdued self. The self here means the mind. We should discipline the mind until we become its master. And exactly the same kind of conversation took place around Amma. Somebody asked, how does one find peace and tranquility? Amma said, first, our false way of thinking must be changed. At present, we think that peace comes from outside, but in fact, the eternal fountain of peace is within you. Okay, we've heard that much, but this truth should be understood first, then you can begin to work towards it. To attain that peace, we should give solitude to the mind. Solitude does not simply mean sitting in an isolated, lovely place filled with natural scenery. Such a surrounding is only a small factor in helping us to gain real solitude. Real solitude is that of the mind. It means one-pointedness of mind. Even a beautiful place will not give you peace of mind if it is agitated. Therefore, we should try to make the mind quiet by slowly controlling, gradually restraining it from running after anything and everything. In the beginning, you should make a deliberate attempt to subdue the mind. Then, in due course, it will become effortless. So, Amma doesn't have to make effort, but you may have met people, some senior Swamis or other people, even householders, they have done a lot of sadhana there too. So, you might see that kind of subdued mind, and it just does whatever the master, the intellect, or the heart says to do. It's much more peaceful, right? What do we need to do that? What do we need in order to do that? And he says fortitude, which we heard about earlier in the chapter. But that fortitude has to be born out of discernment, which is just a function of the intellect. A subtle intellect will always render strong willpower. When you combine knowledge with fortitude, the mind can be controlled and thoughts can be regulated. The next job is turning the sense organs away from the sense objects, which is abandoning sound and other sense objects. So let's say somebody asks, but what if I give up everything? What pleasure will I have in my life? If the intellect is clear enough, they would understand when we tell them that worldly pleasures are only delayed suffering, like Amma says. And Krishna also says in chapter 5, verse 22, all pleasures of contact are wombs of pain. And you may think, born out of contact, well, I'm just watching, I'm just hearing, I'm not touching it, I'm not having contact with it. But unfortunately, in Vedanta philosophy, it is said that the sense organs like the eyes, ears, nose, mouth, etc., have that ability to go out to those things. So when you see a new phone or a computer or a dress or a sports car or something, your eye is going to it and saying, yum, I like that Ferrari or something. So it's coming in contact with that object so that we can't escape. Here, the conviction is essential. The intellect must have the conviction that sense pleasures are dangerous. Like Amma always says, who would eat a bowl of ice cream if we knew that it had poison in it? Avoiding poison is something to be happy about, right? Making the right choices makes us happy. It's not suppression. Without the intellect's intervention, it becomes suppression, which is very hard for everybody. But with understanding, little by little, we transcend our likes and dislikes. Just like little babies slowly grow out of their habit of eating sand. And believe it or not, I remember being scolded by my mother for eating sand. It's the only thing I can remember from that age. But we were all doing it, mud pies and all these things. Then you're like, oh, wait, maybe I shouldn't be eating all this bad stuff. That's not suppression, right? So don't let people tell you that you're suppressing your desires. You're growing out of them. You don't walk around with your, blanket anymore, right? Even after turning away from the sense organs, even after turning away the sense organs from the sense objects, the mind may still have attachments. That's why Krishna has to say, abandon attraction and aversion. In chapter 2, verse 59, he said, the objects of sense turn away from one who does not feed on them, but the taste for them persists. On seeing the Supreme, even this taste ceases. So don't be surprised if your mind craves for something for some weird reason. It means that we have to curb that tendency, but also it's probably coming from so old birth, a long time ago. Even after turning the sense organs away, the mind still yearns for something. That also must be relinquished, again, with the help of the same discernment. We have to go back to our discernment over and over again and say, is this the right thing to do? And what if everybody did this? Is this good for my spiritual life, or is it just because my tongue wants it, etc.? When we contemplate it, we realize that we ourselves create our moments of joy and sorrow due to those likes and dislikes. The objects themselves can neither give joy nor sorrow. Like Amma says, when you smoke a cigarette, the smoker loves it, but the person next to him may hate the smoke. So who's right? Neither one. It's a question of each person's vasanas. Understanding this clearly, we become like a witness. We feel it is neither good nor bad. All of these are the preparations for nididhyasanam. We haven't even reached nididhyasanam. We have to cultivate all these virtues first. And that was 5. We have another 13 to go, sorry. But we'll finish them tonight. Not inculcating them, but at least educating ourselves. Verse 52. Vivikta Sevi Lagwasi Yata Vakaya Manasaha Dhyana Yoga Paro Nityam Vairagyam Samupashritaha. Then together. Vivikta Sevi Lagwashi Yatavakaya Manasaha Dhyana Yoga Paro Nityam Vairagyam Samupashritaha. Dwelling in solitude is what I made it. Eating little, body, speech, and mind controlled, ever engaged in meditation and concentration, possessed of dispassion. Okay, the commentary. It's more than 5, but body, speech, and mind, it's a freebie, we just put it all together. Dwelling in solitude means, according to Shankaracharya, solitary places like a forest or a cave on a mountain or something. We could say, an ashram, a center, Amrita Puri, wherever it is, wherever Amma is definitely helps us to find the solitude. Even though there's no solitude outside, we can get the inner solitude. And when you combine that with eating little, these two, he says, are mentioned as conducive to serenity of mind, warding off sleep, etc. And dwelling in solitude is supposed to be good for serenity of mind, and moderation of food wards off sleep, lethargy, and poor comprehension. So, if you eat too much, then you won't be able to understand these subtle principles. Ever engaged in meditation means their supreme business is always contemplating on the natural state of the self. That's your only job, just imagine that. We would say, that's great, I'll do it. And then after about 10 minutes, can I think about something else? No, sorry. It would drive us crazy. But it should be our goal, at least. Concentration means here one-pointedness on the self alone. And possessed of dispassion means freedom from desire for objects seen and unseen. So it's not just food, it's like, it could be the afterworld, it could be, your intelligence, or, the deities, that we want to do some kind of ritual to them. All those things, those desires are all gone. Jnaneshwar says, they dwell in solitude in a forest, far from the maddening crown, their company being their own body and organs. Restraint of the senses and self-control become their recreation. Oh, wow. Hey, let's go do something fun. What? Let's fast. Let's do maunam, that's our recreation. But that's the kind of person we have to become. And they observe silence. They are not even conscious how their time passes in meditation on the Guru's teachings. While eating, they never give any thought to maintaining their strength, satisfying their hunger, or catering to particular tastes. The contentment they derive from a frugal meal is beyond measure. How many times did I complain about the food in Amrita Puri after moving in there? Definitely have a long ways to go. They are afraid that if they don't feed the abdominal fire, it will take away their life. So they eat in moderation only to sustain life. They do not disturb their posture in the same way as a chaste woman does not succumb to a lustful person. The movements of their hands and feet are reduced to the bare minimum. In short, they keep the mind and senses under the control. They don't even allow their inclinations to reach the threshold of the mind. It's an amazing way of putting it, because that threshold is at the time you wake up. No inclinations can come up at that time. It's all under control. Then what scope is there for giving expression to them in words? After conquering body, speech, and mind, they turn to the sky of concentrated meditation. Just as one sees one's face clearly in the mirror, they then scrutinize the nature of the self, as instructed by the Guru. Meditation ordinarily consists of the meditator, the state of meditation, and the object of meditation. O son of Pandu, one must meditate until the object of meditation, the act of meditation, and the meditation itself all become one. Therefore, the seeker who is intent upon attaining knowledge of self takes to the yoga of meditation. Now here, there's a couple paragraphs that delineate how the details in a very kind of occult way. It's kind of a Raja Yoga approach, which is Nyandev's specialty. So there should be a link to an optional additional description, a file with a PDF. And if you want to read that, you can read that after the class. I wouldn't try to read it now, unless you're reading this after it's over. In this way, they practice the yogic discipline steadily for the attainment of self-knowledge in order to ward off obstacles along the way. They make friends with non-attachment. So, just to make that clear, if you want to ward off obstacles on the way, you have to make friends with detachment. Because the definition of an obstacle is something that we just don't like. So if you're so detached that you like everything, then you don't have any obstacles. If one has a lamp in hand, will there be any delay in seeing the desired goal? So long as the seeker has the company of non-attachment, how can they meet with obstacles in their sadhana? Therefore, that fortunate person who practices yoga combined with non-attachment becomes qualified for attaining Brahman. So he has only 2 prerequisites, which is pretty hopeful. Once again, yoga, it's basically nididhyasana on the Guru's teachings and detachment, vairagya. Chidbhavananda Swami's commentary. Humans are extroverted beings. Solitary confinement is a punishment inflicted on them and can even make them go insane if isolated too long. People need company, and our first and foremost lesson in life is getting along with people. The yogi, however, prefers solitude to transform themselves from extrovert to introvert. Their delight and relaxation are all in the self. The company of others can become a hindrance for them, which for a seeker can be a sign of progress. In time, they learn that solitude, this means other seekers, in time they learn that solitude is to the mind what food is to the body. We come into this world alone and we leave it alone. Exactly an Amma quote. A yogi is one who learns to be alone while in the world. Both overeater and undereating are harmful at the initial stage. But as one advances in age and in yoga, one finds that undereating is advantageous both to the body and the mind. Lightness of the body and clarity of the mind are the advantages. The yogi commands perfect mastery over their speech, body, and mind. They speak, but sparingly, not wasting any words, and marked by measured speech, ever to the point. The yogi involuntarily reveals an elegance in their demeanor. Their movements are all purposeful and unembellished. They are in their element when absorbed in the thought of God. If any other thought happens to cross their mind, it causes them acute pain. Amazing. Their norm is being engaged in meditation on the Paramatman. A novice tries to cultivate vairagya toward the world. The yogi reflects on the defects of sense pleasure whenever a passing thought of indulgence appears in their unwary mind. So some stray thought comes in. So let's say a weird thought comes in your mind, it's something about indulgence, then the yogi, if we're a yogi, we will remember the defects about that thing. So it is said that food is, like I said, a medicine for the disease of hunger. So you can, if you want to eat something, you remind yourself of that and don't, overeat or eat some lavish food. But a master of yoga has no such struggle. As a ripe fruit that has fallen from the tree never returns to it, the yogi no more gives any thought to worldly enjoyment. So the previous verse and this one each have 5 conditions for attaining Brahman, and we have 8 more to go. Dwelling in solitude is one of the parts of this verse we're looking at now. And this came in chapters 6 and 13 before. Even for a householder, they should regularly seek solitude for at least some time, forgetting all activities and relationships. And that's exactly what Amma says. She says this is one of the purposes of having ashrams, because you may be stuck in your house, but at least if you can come for satsang once a week, or you spend a few days once a month just staying in the ashram, she says it helps us a lot. People can get a taste of sannyasa and ashram life, and isn't that what all of us experienced at one time or another? My first meeting with Amma was Berkeley, but I didn't get a hug. So when I got my first darshan, I was already in Amma's ashram, San Ramon. And I kept going there. And so, I didn't live there, but I got so much out of it. So that is a version of solitude. We're away from the world, society, and we're in a different element, which is purely spiritual. Eating little. Some people spend a lot of time planning their meals, fantasizing about them and all that, but that's probably not advice here. There's one funny story that I remember from a long time ago. A French devotee was going to Amrita Puri for the first time. He was probably retired, almost retired. So he had his, habits were very deeply ingrained. So he brought 1.5 huge suitcases full of cheese. Yeah, it was either going to be coffee or cheese, but this guy liked cheese. And he was just eating from there, and the thing is that there's no refrigerators. And the cheese is already kind of stanky from the beginning. So the next door neighbor complained to the international office, some foul smell is coming from the room next door to me. Is he okay? And they opened and they found all this moldy cheese all over the place. And this was what the person really wanted to eat, and hauled it all the way from Paris. Okay. Shankaracharya says food is the medicine. I told that to you already. Now Amma has a beautiful interaction with somebody which covers both the food part and the self-control part of this verse. Devotee once asked Amma, "At times, I cannot control my desires." I wonder if anybody else feels like that. "When I control them, they only get stronger." Amma's response was, "Oh son, it is very difficult to control desires. Still, one should maintain certain restrictions, otherwise it will be impossible to subdue the mind." He didn't say he wanted to subdue the mind, but she's telling you have to subdue your mind. Foods like meat, eggs, and fish will increase desire. Then the senses will act in such a way as to fulfill the desire, and one will lose one's energy. Eating sattvic food in moderate quantities, however, will cause no problem. When you're doing sadhana, control of the diet is essential. For someone who has a lot of mental strength, changes in diet won't be a problem, but such things will affect other people. Then, a young person who was eavesdropping from nearby says, "So one's nature changes with diet?" And Amma said, "Yes. Each food has its own qualities, and each flavor, like hot, sour, or sweet, has its own influence. Even if one eats sattvic food, it should be in moderation. Milk, ghee, etc., are sattvic, but they shouldn't be consumed in excess. Each kind of food has a different effect on us. Meat dishes will make our minds unsteady. For those who are pursuing sadhana with an intense yearning to conserve energy and realize the self, discipline in diet is absolutely essential in the beginning. When first planting a seed, we must protect it from the sun. Once it grows into a tree, it will have the strength to withstand the sun. Restraint in diet during sadhana is as necessary as eating wholesome and agreeable diet while taking medicines. But after making some progress in sadhana, food restrictions aren't so crucial anymore. And don't say that, okay, then I'm going to eat whatever I want, Big Mac or whatever it is. But it means that they're not going to eat the things that are really bad for them. Let's say one time somebody gives an egg or something, they're not going to die. That's basically what it means. Body, speech, and mind controlled. That part means mastery of all three. The body does good things in the right way, at the right time, knowing what and when to speak. That's a tough one. The mind doesn't think unnecessary and bothersome thoughts. In all ways, we do only what is needed, and then we just leave the rest to Amma. And this part where he says, possessed of dispassion, it means detachment from even the minimum things that we have. The body, the clothes, and a few possessions. We should have detachment even to that. Ever engaged in meditation and concentration, this is exactly what nididhyasanam is. And that is made possible due to all the things before this. All these other virtues are what sustain it. So we will now move on to verse 53. Ahankaram palam darpam kamam krodham parigraham vimuccha nirmama shanto brahma bhuyaya kalpate. Then together. Ahankaram balam darpam kamam krodham parigraham vimuccha nirmama shanto brahma bhuyaya kalpate. If you didn't already know, in Sanskrit, every E, A, B, C, D, E, and every O are automatically elongated. So above those two vowels, we don't put the dirgham, that long line above the vowel. We don't need it for E's and O's. Okay, Shankaracharya's commentary. I think I took the most from this verse today. Egotism. This means identification of the self with the body and senses, etc. So, if someone says you have such a big ego, or what's wrong with all this egotism, you say like, well, I've been identifying with this body for a long time and I'm really struggling. They're like, no, that's not what I'm talking about. But then, even if we get rid of the typical ego, we still have this identification with the body and even the emotions, which is the mind. It's very broad spectrum. Power means the capacity associated with passion and desire, and not any other strength, such as that of the body, which being natural is impossible to discard. So, That's why this word power is sometimes translated as desire, because Shankaracharya's commentary says that it's not physical power, because you can't say anybody with big muscles is a bad person. It's impossible. So he clarified that. Arrogance means it comes close upon exaltation and leads to adharma. So let's say somebody does something foolish, and instead of having compassion, you laugh at them and you make fun of them. That is an example of arrogance, even though we don't typically call that arrogance. It is the doorway to adharma, because the next thing that happens is, you're going to be the object of ridicule, and then you'll be angry and all the other emotions that follow. And possessions. That means, though having relinquished all the passions of the senses and the mind, one may get some external belongings necessary for bodily sustenance and their swadharma. And then freed from the notion of mind is the second half of that last part, which is not even regarding the body life as their own. And all these, simple and very humble possessions you have to let go of also, mentally. So and then he says, one more thing, because once you let go of this feeling of mine, then the mind becomes tranquil. So tranquil is the last quality in this verse. And Shankaracharya says, one who is of this nature qualifies for becoming Brahman. So put that on your to-do list. Because you don't have to fight to reach Brahman if we have all these qualities. Jnaneshwar says, and this is partly coming from the previous verse, they destroy all faults that are hostile to them. I mean, your own faults are hostile to you, right? That's the idea. The foremost among them is egoism. Last one was egotism. They're mixing and matching. Now we know what it is, though. It's identifying with the body and the mind and the intellect. The foremost of them is egoism, which does not release them even after death. What? Even after death? Yes. Because your subtle body is what leaves the body, nothing else. Nor does it let them leave peacefully, but keeps them bound in the prison of bones, this body, making them miserable. Sounds pretty convincing. They also destroy their second enemy, which is strength. This enemy waxes strong at the very mention of sense objects and obscures the whole world. This desire should be taken as a spot of poisonous deep water in the form of sense objects, as also the chief among all the faults. That means, bad qualities. But even this enemy cannot bear the strokes of the sword in the form of meditation. So the most powerful sword is meditation. It can cut down all of these negative qualities. They then destroy the enemy pride, which, under the pretext of giving happiness, entices them to agreeable sense objects. That's what the mind does all the time. Let's go do this. It's going to be great. We're going to be so happy. And then if you follow what the mind says, you'll be like, oh, this was such a waste of time. It always happens that way. This third enemy deludes them and makes them miss the path of virtue and enter the jungle in the form of adharma, only to fall into the jaws of a tiger in the form of hell. Doesn't end very well. Then they destroy the enemy desire, which makes even ascetics tremble, begets the vicious fault of anger, and remains starving the more it is fed. So, I don't know if you got all that. Desire, makes ascetics tremble. I mean, getting rid of that is very difficult, that's what it means. And desire gives birth to anger, because if your desires are obstructed, you're going to get angry. And it is starving, it remains starving the more it is fed. So the more you give desire, the more it burns high in the sky. Like when a tree is uprooted, its branches also get destroyed. So too, the eradication of desire brings about the destruction of anger. Just as a person of authority makes an offender carrying... We don't do this today. This is 750 years ago. Just as a person of authority makes an offender carry on his head the chains that bind his ankles, so too the enemy possessions rides on their head, corrupt their mind, and makes them addicted to vices and compels them to carry the stick of attachment. That's what possessions do to all of us. That's the idea. Because of possession, even a detached ascetic becomes entangled in the snares in the form of, this is my disciple, this is my book, this is my hermitage. That possession, which was shaken off after leaving the family, returns in the form of shady forests. So we have to be careful not to get too attached to the ashram, but as long as Amma is there, I think it's okay. By knocking off the bottom of this invincible enemy named possession, they experience the joy of victory over worldly life. Then all the means of knowledge, such as absence of pride in others, come to pay homage to them, like princes in the kingdom of liberation. They offer them tribute in the form of mastery over true knowledge and remain as their entourage. Even if they call one on a rare occasion their friend, even then they entertain no idea of duality. So if Amma says, "Oh, this is my son, this is my daughter," she doesn't mean duality. For her, there is no duality. It's for other people to understand. They have pervaded the whole universe by their majesty, with the result that no attachment affects them, like this is mine or this is not mine. Thus, having conquered all the enemies, they regard the whole universe as a non-entity. Then, for a moment, I love this part because he's explaining those last few moments before realization. Then, for a moment, they loosen their impregnable armor of non-attachment and slackens their hand, as nothing remains to slash with the sword of meditation. Nothing remains to be destroyed. Just as the medicine, after serving its purpose, becomes superfluous, similar is their state. Just as walking comes to a halt after reaching the destination, so too their yogic practice stops after the attainment of Brahman. The holy Ganges slackens its speed after it joins the sea. A banana tree stops its growth after bearing fruit. In the same way, after they know that they are about to realize the self, they slowly lay down their weapons in the form of spiritual practices. O Arjuna, when the time comes to attain union with Brahman, then their yogic practice comes to an end. Then they attain perfect peace, which is the consummation of non-attachment, the end of the study of knowledge, and the fulfillment of their yogic practice, to have become qualified to become Brahman. The difference between the Supreme Brahman and the perfected soul qualified to become Brahman is the same as that of the moon on the full moon night and the moon on the previous night. You're just one moon away, one day away. It is like the difference between 24 karat gold and 22 karat gold. Then they soon become Brahman on account of the perfect peace of mind they have achieved. This experience of Brahman without becoming one with it is known as fitness for becoming Supreme Brahman. Chidbhavanand Swami's commentary. A person is different from the clothing they wear. But there are those who identify themselves with their clothes and feel happy and miserable due to the remarks made on their clothes. This identification is egoism, or of a crude kind. Identification with the body is the egoism kept up all through the soul's transmigrations. So we've had this egoism for millions of births. Even when we were an amoeba, we were like, oh, I'm pretty cool. I mean, what else is an amoeba going to say? They're just very simple animals. Renouncing body consciousness and being established in the self is abandonment of egoism. While exercising strength, that individual who succeeds in subduing others thinks very highly of himself and lightly of others. This attitude is arrogance. The yogi never runs the risk of falling victim to this evil. They're beyond that. Kama, or desire, is the hankering after sense pleasure. One who cherishes the senses is a bhogi, and one who curbs the senses is a yogi. The latter has no interest in any base desires. I mean, base desires means, seeing a flower and being so happy to see such a beautiful thing. That's not really a desire. You can say, oh, when there'll be any flowers out today. I mean, these are simple, very pure ones. He's talking about base desires that are selfish and hurt other people and yourself. An obstructed desire transforms itself into anger. The yogi who sees divinity in all is given neither to likes or dislikes. Bodily sustenance is not possible without possessions. The ownership of the body leads to the ownership of the property also. While in the body, the yogi is not out of the body, is not of the body. While in possession of the bare necessities of the body, the thought of possession is still not in their mind. So you have one mat, you have your yoga mat, your sleeping mat, yoga mat, you have your dhotis or saris, and maybe, some soap. Even that, you're like, well, it's not mine, the ashram gave it to me, I'm borrowing it. Since the yogi is free from ownership of any kind, they are automatically free from the notion of mine. When all the disturbing factors are eliminated from the mind, its resting in peacefulness is a matter of course. The yogi imbued with these qualities is fit for becoming Brahman. Amma says, we should learn to be like beginners. A beginner is not egoistic and therefore learns everything fast. However, to cultivate this humility, we have to give up one thing, just one tiny thing, our ego, our egoism. It is this ego that blocks everything good. This is Amma's words, if you didn't already figure that out. When we renounce this ego, automatically we ensure our success in every field. More than all the effort on our part, it is God's grace that is of paramount importance. What blocks that grace is our ego. Therefore, we have to eliminate this ego. We have to eliminate this ego by any means. Once we get rid of this ego, greatness will be ours. Just a few words about the same words, but from a different standpoint. Forsaking egoism, power, pride, desire, anger, and positions, all these things are basically the asuric swabhava. In chapter 16, I think it was, we learned about the qualities of the asuras, and it was not very impressive. We definitely don't want to be like asuras, demons. But this verse is describing how to overcome those, or that a person who has overcome them is able to merge in Brahman. So it means that we are not, and that means we have some of these qualities within us: pride, desire, anger, etc. What we have to figure out is how, when, and where, and why. Even bodily strength. Even bodily strength is not necessary for a sadhak. Depending on our occupation, strength can be necessary, but for others, it is not even helpful. It is discouraged. Why? Because when body strength increases, the bodily needs and cravings also increase. In the context of this verse, the sadhak is meditating all the time, so they don't need much food at all. Less possessions means less thoughts about possessions. We struggle to obtain them. That's yoga. That's another definition of yoga. We struggle to obtain them, but the law of entropy dictates that we will have to struggle hard to keep them, and that it's kshema. To avoid the problem of possessions, Krishna introduces freed from the notion of mine. We can think these minimum possessions don't need any ownership after all. They're just gifts that Amma gave to me. I'm borrowing them and I'll eventually have to give them back. So the best way is to never build a very strong bond with our possessions, because it's just setting us up for, disappointment. And it should be a weak connection instead. We should be ready to lose it at any time. We ourselves may not even be here tomorrow. So these are the two important steps about possessions. We reduce them and avoid a sense of ownership with whatever few possessions we have. And this absence of mine is what renders the fruit of tranquility. All these 18 qualities are sattvic, and the exact opposite of the asuric qualities we learned about in chapter 16. Thus, they are fit for oneness with Brahman. And may we all also become fit to find oneness with Brahman by Amma's grace. Om Namah Shivaya. I have one question to answer before we close. This will be a question of interest to everybody, I think, most people. If it's not a problem for you, it's probably a problem for your parents or relatives. This is from someone in I think it was Europe. As this body of mine is getting older, I found limitations in my daily life and sadhana that I did not have before. Does Amma suggest things to do for older people? We're all getting older. First of all, I would say don't feel bad. But if you don't compare yourself with others, you will see that there are sadhanas and work for everyone. So don't compare yourself for the people who are running around doing all these things very actively. There are things to do. There are people who write letters to people who are in prisons. There's the circle of love. That's part of it. And also, smiling is, in Japan, we decided that smiling is a seva. And we called this new group called Amrita Silver. And they have silver hair, and so they just sit at the table and they're smiling. Hi, what can I do to help you? Everybody else is like, Amma's coming, 5 minutes, get set up, hurry, So that's a great job, I think. Yeah, in fact, I was saying that the people who are doing was "May I help you?" They have that heart on their front. It says "May I help you?" Sometimes I think we should have something on the back side of it, which is, please help me. Because after like 150 people asking you questions, you're like, please help me. Okay. Then it goes on. For example, I can no longer sit on the floor for more than 20 minutes. My hands hurt every morning, so whatever I do takes longer, or I need to find other alternatives. Also, my seva is getting challenged. Most devotees at the ashram do not understand that I am in pain doing certain movements, especially repetitive moves. It could be Amritapuri, it could be here, it could be any of the ashrams. They don't say which ashram. I had to change seva because of my hands. And then what I wanted to say is, previously in Amma's program halls, there were very few chairs. But because everybody was getting older, out of her infinite compassion, she increased the number of chairs every year. This shows that Amma has no problem with people sitting in chairs. And the experience of having pain during your seva will probably be the same for all of us at one time or another. And I think that's part of life. And you try something else, and if you can't do it anymore, then you can be the smiling Sevite. You just happen to be experiencing it a bit earlier than some others. In a few years, we will all be in the same boat. Unfortunately, Amma has already masterfully prepared for the future by raising all the amazing new generation in Amritapuri and all over the world. So if you would like to have some consultation about a special seva, you can share wherever you are. You can say, okay, I'm here. This is the options that I have. Please let me know. And then we can have an exchange through email, perhaps. The last part of the question was, thanks to Swami Dayamritananda's suggestion in one of his online classes, I started Manasa Puja, which is mental worship, during COVID that person started. I'm glad that I did, as I can always do this mental worship. But my concern is, as I age, health will not get much better, but degenerate, and my sadhana will be affected. And my sadhana is what keeps me going in a positive state of mind. So this person does not want to lose the little inner peace that they already have. So all I can say is that do whatever you can, and remember that the benefit you get from your sadhana is relative to your age and physical health. For a young person who has been doing yoga for years, sitting in lotus posture is easy. So there's no austerity about that. When we get older, what used to be a simple thing becomes tapas, but that itself is a kind of sadhana. What matters is our attitude. Offering 1,000 flower petals to the altar may be easy for some people, but if they are not focused on God at that time, it's just a mechanical process. The pains and humiliations of aging ensure that we will definitely be doing sadhana until the very end. Dealing with pain is a sadhana. It's not going to be like the cut and dry sadhanas. You have to make every moment into a sadhana. The pains and humiliations of aging ensure that we will be doing sadhana until the very end if we remember Amma and offer all of our struggles at her feet. So it's not just the mind complaining and saying, oh, I hurt, everything hurts. You just offer it to Amma. It was this morning or the day before, someone was talking about that. Same thing. Had to go through that, so much pain. I think it was day before yesterday. She had a lot of pain. She was from somewhere, anyhow. It was a beautiful satsang. Then, even a single flower petal with tears of longing is enough to receive Amma's grace. And I'm remembering at the end when Ron was just on the cusp of this world and the merging in Amma. All he would say is, Amma, 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 Amma. And that's how he left. So he was more incapacitated than anybody, but he just remembered Amma's name at the time of leaving. So I wouldn't worry about it so much. Just trust in Amma and try to make all of your elderly challenges your actual sadhana. Namah Shivaya. As I said last time, this is the last class for some time, probably a couple of months or even more, I'm not sure. So it's a good time to review and reread things in the Gita. It could be other commentaries, it could be other classes. We have, there's so many commentaries. You can read them yourself, but don't waste the time. Put it to good use in your Gita studies. We will now conclude with the first two closing mantras, and those who have time to remain, please stay for a short meditation. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shri Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om. Those of us joining us, close your eyes, check your posture, and slow down the breathing process. Feel your body and mind relaxing further and further with each and every long, deep breath. Feel Amma's subtle presence all around you. Feel yourself in her embrace even now. Feeling the warmth of her embrace and her heart. Now shift your awareness to the flow of your breathing process. Witness the breath flow in and out. Witness as like an observer on the banks of a very peaceful stream, watching the water peacefully flow by. Now let us turn our awareness to the mind, and we will be using the Ma Om technique to make our mind one-pointed. And if the mind wavers from the Ma Om, we have to, as instructed even in this tonight's class, bring the mind back to the point of concentration. The intellect should give the reasons, and the mind should be very firm. So I will begin with the Ma Om, and for some time we will be repeating that mentally. But when the mind walks away or wavers, we have to gently bring it back and make it return to the same flow. Ma Om Ma Om Ma Om. Continue to feel those vibrations in your breathing. Now let us conclude by praying to Amma for her divine guidance and protection. Oh, my beloved Amma, you are our only hope in reaching Brahman. Please help me. Please help me cultivate all of the virtues that we learned about today. That's the only way to have one-pointed meditation. So with your help and your guidance and your grace, may I be able to keep my mind more and more concentrated and still, free from all these botherations like possessions, likes and dislikes, and so on. I want to focus on the love that I have for you, Amma. That's all that matters. And we will conclude with the final prayer. Take a deep breath. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnaad Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Avashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Oh, one more long deep breath. And as you exhale, you can slowly open your eyes if you wish. You can slowly open your eyes if you wish. Om Namah Shivaya, everybody. I hope you know that there is a retreat starting here in Chicago on Friday evening. So if you just wait for a moment, you'll see a explanation and the link to find it on the internet. Om Namah Shivaya.